The various classifications for armored vehicles are quite a contentious subject for many, whether it be a recent example like the M10 Booker, which we're told isn't a light tank, or the topic of today's video, the Waffenträger. Despite the name translating to weapon carrier, which would indicate them being intended as gun carriers or self-propelled guns, many would look at these vehicles and assume they were meant as expedient tank destroyers, similar to the Hetzer we have discussed previously. Judging by the polls I ran here and over on X, an overwhelming percentage of you would agree with this sentiment. So this begs the question, what were these vehicles originally meant to be? Stick around till the end of the video and let's see if we can answer that. In the almost 5 years since I originally covered the topic of the Waffenträger concept, not only have I learned a wealth of information about tanks in general, but I have also come to have a much deeper understanding of the thought process behind their designs. While there were many factors which eventually led to me creating this type of content, such as my love for cars and the stories behind them, I also have the sponsor of today's video, War Thunder, to thank for both the success of this channel and deepening my interest in tank history. No doubt if you enjoy this style of content, you've heard of War Thunder, but if you somehow haven't, War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever. Not only that, you can play it on PC, consoles, and even your mobile devices for free. Among the over 2,500 tanks, aircraft, and ships from 10 major nations ranging from the turn of the 20th century to the modern day, they even have one of the Waffenträger designs we'll be discussing in today's video. This and the others are all recreated with detailed models with authentic sounds and stunning visuals. Just like the real Waffenträger, the one in-game features damage models for everything from the engine and transmission to the ammunition and cannon, meaning when you hit an enemy or get shot yourself, it damages those parts rather than just taking away from a health bar. Join the over 70 million players from around the world today using my links below to start playing for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile, and both new players or returning players who haven't played in 6 months will receive a starter bonus across PC and consoles, including multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive Eagle of Valor decoration, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account. This is only available for a limited time, so be sure to grab it while you can. Huge thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back into our main topic. To understand the thought process behind the Waffenträger, all you need to do is look at guns like this 88mm behind me. At the start of the war, the anti-tank guns of the German army were small guns like the 37mm, which could be moved around by a few men. But as the war progressed, they grew exponentially larger. By the time the 8.8cm Pak-43 came around, this had ballooned to over 6 tons, or in American terms, 3 Dodge Challengers. As you can imagine, this made it much more difficult to move these around, leading to complaints from troops in the field and even losses of the weapons altogether. With the loss of these valuable anti-tank weapons being unacceptable, discussions began on how to resolve this issue, and the idea of the Waffenträger, or weapons carrier, was born. Unlike previous designs such as the Nashorn we have discussed previously, this was not to use a tank chassis or other pre-existing one. Armor protection would similarly follow the Nashorn, being between 10 and 20mm thick, not enough to stop anti-tank rounds, but enough to protect the crew from small arms fire or artillery fragmentation. Unlike the limited traverse offered by the other open-topped anti-tank vehicles, the Waffenträger was to have at least 180 degrees, although full 360-degree firing angles was preferred. In order for these to act as both anti-tank weapons and artillery support, vertical traverse was specified to be 8 degrees of depression and at least 42 degrees of elevation. Other requirements included a speed of 35 km per hour on roads and 30 km per hour off-road with a driving range of 140 to 200 km. Operating the vehicle would be a crew of 4 to 5 with it carrying a 50-round supply of ammunition for the 8.8cm L71 cannon. Two different designs based on these specifications would see development following these discussions in early 1944 from 4 companies. The chassis designs for these would come from Ardelt and Steyr, with the guns being provided by Krupp and Rheinmetall Borsig. It is worth noting before we look at these designs that there are many other concepts similar to these which saw development during World War II, with some also referred to as Waffenträgers. However, we will look at those in a future video. The first of these designs to be completed was the one built by Ardelt. As mentioned earlier, the armored chassis itself was of a new design, however the other components were taken from existing designs. For example, the suspension was taken from the 38T, the tracks taken from the Steyr Raupenschlepper Ost, also known as the RSO, and the engine being the same Maybach HL42 used in various half-tracks. 2 variants of this design would be produced, with the first mounting the Rheinmetall 8.8 cm in an open-topped enclosure. This gave the vehicle a silhouette reminiscent of the Nashorn at first glance, at least in my opinion, although this quickly changes upon any rotation of the gun. A single example of this design would be produced for trials, with the firing trials taking place on April 27th and 28th, 1944. These found the vehicle to be acceptable, with the report even noting that the shot pattern was exceptional for the weather conditions. The platform proved stable regardless of what direction the gun was fired in, with the only issues found being an inability for the commander and driver to communicate and some mobility issues, including some involving the RSO tracks. A second prototype chassis was to be ready by the 20th of June 1944, although this would instead be armed with the help of Krupp following Rheinmetall leaving the project. At the same time the ardelt-rheinmetall design was being developed, Steyr and Krupp were hard at work on their own Waffenträger design. Steyr's chassis was similar to the Ardelt one in overall layout, but the components used were significantly different. Understandably, the choice was made to utilize parts already being produced in-house, with the entire running gear made using things taken from the RSO. Despite the push for existing production components to be used, Steyr was intent on using a new, unproven 12-cylinder boxer motor producing 140 horsepower. The 8.8 cm gun was fitted into an open-topped enclosure with full 360 degrees of traverse, similar to the ardelt-rheinmetall design, although with an angled hexagonal construction. A unique traverse system was also considered, with it using a chain drive following a proposal by Krupp. Unlike a toothed system, this only allowed 2 full turns of traverse in one direction before needing to be rotated back. 4 prototypes of this design were ordered, with 2 featuring a traditional traverse system taken from the Tiger program and the other 2 featuring the chain system. It would appear only one example of this design was ever completed though, and both this and the Rheinmetall 8.8 cm armed Ardelt Waffenträger would lose out in favor of the ardelt-krupp design. Other than some minor changes, the chassis remained similar to the previous Ardelt prototype. However, now instead of a specially designed gun shield, the decision was made to mount an unmodified Pak-43 complete with gun shield. With the addition of side shields to this, an acceptable amount of protection was given to the crew, and reportedly the overall performance of the vehicle was improved. These 2 Ardelt variants, along with the Steyr design, would be shown to Hitler sometime in late 1944, although by that point a production contract had already been issued. Although it did not meet all of the initial requirements set for the project, this new Ardelt design proved to be both the most cost-effective and best performing, leading to it being accepted for an initial production run of 100 at the end of May in 1944. 82 of these were to be fitted with the 8.8 cm provided by Krupp, with the remaining 18 to serve as ammunition carriers for them. Production was to begin immediately to fill this order, however delays plagued their assembly, and by February of 1945 only 7 completed Waffenträger were available. Photos show one of these using RSO tracks, although other photos show them using 38T tracks, with this including the original ardelt-rheinmetall prototype. Why this was done isn't clear, but we can likely assume it was either due to parts availability or it being an earlier production vehicle. The fact the gun shield features hinged side plates rather than the later fixed style does seem to support the latter, although this is entirely speculation. Regardless, these would be used to form an emergency Panzerjäger unit in defense of the town of Eberwald with no information surviving on their performance. This would not be the end of the story for the Waffenträger though, with development continuing even as the Ardelt design entered production. However, with the ever-worsening war situation and the future production plans for war materials, changes were deemed necessary. These changes resulted in a new design allowing for a wider range of armaments.
This would have been a so-called standard Waffenträger, with it featuring either the 10.5cm gun or an 8.8cm gun and using components entirely from the 38T or later 38D chassis. In my video on the Jagdpanzer 38T, we briefly touched on the 38D, but this was essentially a further improvement on the 38T.
These components included the running gear as seen on the previous Ardelt design, as well as the Tatra diesel engine. Two variations of this idea were discussed, with a light Waffenträger for the 10.5 or 8.8cm weighing 14 to 16 tons, and a medium Waffenträger for the 12.8cm or 15cm weighing 20 tons. These would differ slightly in design, with the light one featuring 4 road wheels per side and the heavier one featuring 6 per side and a longer chassis. Production estimates for these were quite hopeful, with scheduled numbers to reach 300 to 350 by the middle of 1945. Given the state of Germany by that point in the war and the fact that the war ended by that time, it should come as no surprise that not a single one of these was ever completed. Although I think it is completely fair to consider these vehicles cursed by design, that does not mean they were a bad idea. While Germany couldn't realistically produce large numbers of expensive vehicles like the Jagdpanther or even the Nashorn armed with the 8.8cm guns, these weapons carriers could have allowed troops in the field to utilize these powerful guns without an immense amount of effort. In many ways, I would compare these to the Jagdpanzer 38T, being a cheap solution to a very real problem impacting the war effort. Had these been developed earlier in the war, they could have greatly increased the ability for the Germans to defend against the encroaching Allied forces, but would be unlikely to significantly alter the outcome of the war. Unfortunately, at least at this time, information on these machines is still a bit lacking, leading to some gaps in our knowledge, but thankfully enough has survived to at least get a reasonable timeline. Today, only a single ardelt-krupp Waffenträger survives at the Kubinka Museum in Russia. Some pieces from the Steyr Waffenträger have also been recovered, although I can't find much information on what the plans for these are, if there are any. So with all that information on their design and development, can we answer the question posed at the beginning of the video? What were the Waffenträger meant to be? Well, both original documentation and the intent behind these designs makes it clear that these should be regarded as self-propelled guns, even if one could make a reasonable argument to consider them tank destroyers. The thin armor would have made them useless in any role other than a supporting one, either used as artillery or a more mobile anti-tank gun, with the tracked chassis only serving to replace a separate towing vehicle. As I mentioned earlier, the classifications of armored vehicles can be quite fickle, and one nation's self-propelled gun could very well be another's tank destroyer or assault gun. Arguably, you could label every armored vehicle with a gun as a self-propelled gun if you really wanted to. This often means it is easiest to go with whatever the nation which built the vehicle designated it, in this case, a self-propelled gun. Let me know what you think down in the comments though. Do you still consider this a tank destroyer, or do you now agree with them being self-propelled guns? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. Check out the links in the description or pinned comment to try the game for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile. New and returning players who haven't played in 6 months also receive a huge bonus pack across PC and consoles, only for a limited time.
I also want to give a huge thanks to the American Heritage Museum for letting me film with some of their vehicles for this video and some other videos coming out soon. If you want to check out the museum for yourself, I'll leave a link below so you can check out how to get there when you're in the area, or see when their next event is that you can come check out and potentially see some of these vehicles in action.
Thanks as always for watching, and to all of my ConelyFans for their generous support of the channel. That's all I have for you today though, so be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd recommend following this by checking out my previous episode on the Nashorn to see another way Germany mobilized their 8.8cm guns. Hope to see you there or in my next video.